Okay, so the first point of the 4-point analysis is identifying your object of refutation. So in general, in our mind, there appears an I that exists from its own side, that is inherently existent, that is not merely labeled on one's body and mind. And so first we're looking to see how this I appears to us.
Gajati Lolo Chartandi Namju Sebo Kati in Goresana Shangiran like Genjo to Chitugala Susu Genche Mevana Genche Pektor Genche Mevala Genche from the Nala contest and Genzu Gore some the paychecks as Nansushimuru to this Sebo Yumaita. Yamana Shangira la Tora to the Tantugalanga, or Tasus a Ganaki Anaki to Golata Nasidu. No, Tora should have Susa Ganaki to Gol. That to do then the Gajangi below data, Lucinti Tineta, Sebo to do charity or SC or that.
So that how did this arise in the mind? When it appears most clearly to us is, for example, if someone criticizes us, for example, we have not done something wrong, but they pick fault with us, and you think, why are they picking fault with me? And that sense of I arises very clearly. Or the other time is if when others praise one, and when one feels praised, again, one feels happy, and this sense of I naturally arises. So in those two ways, this object of refutation arises clearly.
That is say which is Takanje. Kanjeta Kantaria, listen to the Tabasam for a money to do the Lode. Kaja to see that the gas Nansu to see. Then the fishing to around to Bachusana. I put under lose the same Yorbata. Pumpotash. Dita Arashi chick Yamena Petrashi Tate. Then you mount a song in a Drosayo Mares and the pay. Katsuchu Tachi Churate, Kabage Venesta Tundani Batter.
So that we identify this object of refutation, how this I in relationship to one's body and mind appears in our mind, and this appearance of something that exists from its own side or is inherently existent. And the second point then is to say, if this inherently existent I existed, either it would have to be one with one's body and mind, or other than that. There is no other option. And so that's your second point. And the term is like your object, the pervasion of the object, the option of how it could exist. There's only these two ways that could exist.
Last yellow shade there, called Pitini, Leta Samaimpa, Tarangone to Satashi to Chadete, Tashi Popote Tarashi Suna, or Tigidobi the Q that tire, called Tata Digidomi the Taiterva, the Duala Tatela, Tanam Yuta, Amata, Sorta, Telekun, Midawachi, Kun, Ta Lamarin Chimotuzanata, Chermuchi, Chimotuzanata. Okay,
so then the third point then would be to say, well, if the I exists in the way it appears as inherently existent and from its own side, then if it was one with the body and mind, then are there faults with this, or is this reasonable? And in terms of the faults that one can see, that in the Great Graduated Part by J. Rinpoche, it explains 6 faults that one would see.
제바지는 또바 개사겐다 제 공부를 루트로서 건속에 삼하게 돼 교인들의 동대야 되나 다 전부직 초dom지는 소샤 요시와.
Yes. Okay, so these 6 faults were not kind of found by Jeremiah that the Master Nagarjuna in previous writings had identified them, and similarly other beings who had gained realizations also saw identified these faults, but Jeremiah kind of put it together in this way.
어떻게 따디께 다보디 간레에서 이렇게 다보디 딱해시 나스인데 단다 말한줄 심리 되는 나스함도 나스에 되는 줄을 차대 나디 다시 풍부되다란 시지이수나 그 나당에 풍부스네 봐 본분에 넣어서 나스 이와체면 된다 매와 다 소리했어. 말에 풍부 다들 라우스 다 본분에 넣어서 되면 다 하고 란시지나 그 이와체는 체면 직 찾아라. 다음 중하당에 풍부스네 봐. 예 나당에 루스 나당에 셈세 다 되는 중아주 된데 거라 다 광문에 거라 된데 거요 와와
Yes. Okay, so the first fault would be, and this is on page 3, that if this I was inherently one with one's body and mind, then it would be absolutely indifferentiable. Right? You couldn't kind of separate or differentiate them in any way. That we would not be able to say I and my aggregates. Generally, we have a thought like this is my mind or my body. That would be meaningless because it is inherently one.
어때지 교인지를 다디 데레다 이빠들티 파티나 제다니와데 마세데 다시 단다 루심데다 베 코라시 치긴수나 아니 야메나 강사 마세 마치 못메도 걸라 누다 셈타다 봉데디 직타도래 야메나 봉보 단다 봉보 누다 셈세다 야메나 봉봉시대도 망보여 봐나 신기 마야 망보 소도래 가사신 그런 뭐다 망보 타바데 용도로 와 어때 내가 가르치는 교회 기봐요 말이돼 망보 타는 게
So that then the second fault would be that if this I was inherently one with one's body and mind, then either because you have one person, oneself, then your body and mind would have to be one, or one aggregate. Or if you would say when you have many, so there is the body and mind, or more divisions into the aggregates, then because there are many, then you would have many selves. And the quote from the commentaries, the middle way, if the aggregates were the self, then since there are many aggregates, the self would also be many.
다 대교인이 받지 않겠어요. 다 교인은 받대 마세디 내가 다시 내가 공부다 다시 공부를 섬다다 고치겠으나 안돼 제법보다 레이 지금 노래서 다 남겨야 두스방하는 마 데려왔대 제법보다 마이케와 렘바포르 할레마소라 제법을 하고 간다디 공부디 개월 란자도 저러더라 개월 란자더라 다더니 과란시 칭스나 그 여체면다 제법보다 레지 다도르와 다티 에스타스나 게 망보 게 심바 망보 연구 왔다 베나 제법보다 레지 칭스나 베나 신게 따레 제스도 따레다 제겐 따레다 신이 지금 바타도 왔다 무슨라 가와다 망보들의 용도를 해서 다들도 남의 친구는 대신 망보여라 다 대마저 먹고 싶은 거 같지로
Okay. Then the third fault is if the I and the basis of the body and mind were inherently one, then there would be the fault of the agent and action being one. So that in general, there is the quote, if that in general, I is the appropriator and the aggregates are what are appropriated. The aggregates are that which are appropriated, taken. And so then if the I and what is appropriate, the aggregates are one, then many faults would arise. And the example is that that axe that cuts the tree and the tree would then become one because the agent and the action becomes one. So that if you were to assert these two were one, there are many contradictions with our direct perception. And this is again explained in detail in the Great Graduated Path, but we're not going to go into it in great detail here.
셴바숨데 간데tat kyol hamasum데 간데싱고르스나 데레다 마세데 네 다시 봉보탄달르심달라 랑시체 인소나 안에 봉보 개와데 직바치도 아스라 봉보데 간주시 게도 요바다도 통고도 와라 뭐 게도 교도 요바 통고도 와 다나 신기 마데베 지 계직 제바데 안에 먼저 교도 그래서봐 마데 계직 제바 교도나 꼭 아랑식 두바인소나 아랑식 두바 계직 제나 안에 저 남의 계직 공공아마다 치마이더니 베라시 타대인 거랬어봐 베라시 타대인소나 안도 개와감에 다다 시디 다니 베라시 타대 자도 그랬어 다티라시 타대 개와감에 다다 시디 다이라시 타대 자소나 아니 다그 심바 숨대 용도래 레체바 출사와타와 레마체바다 테와타와 아니 기와템바 미테바타와 세야된도 용도래 가이스네 개와감에 개와감에 세디 나다 개와 아메 나이니고 데와메 바라시 타대 자소나 세디 동안 대통령보다 개와감에 레트게 제불에스 랍식 말와 달레 레 마체바다 테바타와도와 제산 개왕감에 가사되게 레 체바디 안 세들의 용거레스나 랍식 말와 이거라시다 따뜻이도 와라 안에 레 체바 주서바 타와레 다나 신게 상계게 상계 권한 상계 전에 나 개왕감에 지랑하는 개왕알레나 수교도스 개왕감에 템바 용거와 어때 식숨바디 다 주의 자도라 개왕템바 타와 이게 숨도스 용도 그래서 다데 삼로티스 당고도 하고도스
So then, if this I is inherently one with the base of the aggregates, then because the aggregates arise and perish momentarily, for example, we can see that our body ages, that our body is changing. So if the I was inherently one with that momentarily changing aggregates, body and mind, then it would also then be inherently momentary. And therefore the other three faults would arise, that the self of this life and previous life would be inherently different. You would have to say that the I, the self of this life, is inherently different from that of a previous life. And therefore, the experiences of happiness and suffering in this life would not be a result of karma that you had created in previous lives, so that your experiences of this life could not arise from previously created karma, because those two selves are inherently different. And so then you would have a fault that you meet with karma that you had not created, and actions that were done in previous lives would be lost or would perish. And then also that when the Buddha spoke of previous lives and then said in such and such a life I was a particular king, that would be a false statement, because those selves are inherently different.
Otus Ustada kya ngade pumbote dagashi pumbote taranshi chiyusuna ta kyo de mambo thoindu taranshi chik tene malaysia sambache tene malaysia santa ta tene taranshi tate yusuna pumbote taranshi tate yusuna digi dugi de tate sam cheba chete tate cheba shiba de ne shiba derwa.
Yes. So in this way, by seeing, if reflecting on whether this I is inherently one with one's aggregates, that and seeing these faults, then one would come to a conclusion that definitely the I is not inherently one with the aggregates. So then one would say, well, come to the fourth point. Well, if it is then the I inherently other or inherently different from the aggregates?
Oh, that is that. Cheba chira tadile tutani betade. Tade ngase de 다시 풍부텔에 빼라시 타대 있으나 다 교인 제수지게 다 교인이여라 교인이 교인이래 타대 교인 지대 아래 빼 마당에 풍부니 빼라시 타대는 그 데메 텐션에 타대 샤서로와 내가 기름에 타대래 되나 그래 풍부디 개와다 지바다 내바 대대치도 알아 마 아니 빼 안나서 다 풍부디 pelé lapata chapena o tangue lapacha nga lapacha society que te deixa me chasarwa
Nos.
aisene ko madange pombo la porti pe rashi tatere baro pe dewa me tatere wa teda otus ticha tore se tere tati tala pombo singi ta me demba tawa se tere wa ni se do ke wa ta chipa ta ne bata ta tende ke se gor barwa 어때 배나가도 밑에 가사대 풍부대 돈도 가라고 가사대 고통스러워 고통스러워 와 이렇게 되셔서 매우 말고 풍부다 가사대기 배터라시 타대로와 됐지 그래.
Okay, so that if this I was inherently different to the aggregates, then there are two main faults that would arise. One is that when we speak of I, it would be completely meaningless and disconnected from the aggregates, disassociated, disconnected. And that the arisal and perishing and abiding of the aggregates would have no relationship to the I. So for example, because we say I'm sick, but that would be meaningless because the I is separate to the aggregates. Or if I broke the bones in my hand, you couldn't say that my hand was broken because the I is completely separate to the aggregates. So it has no association. If it's inherently different, it would have no association at all with the aggregates, and it would not have the characteristics of the aggregates of arising and abiding and perishing. And even because we say, when we see some with aggregates, we say, I saw them or I met them. And again, there would be no way to say this because the person is inherently different to the aggregates.
대체들이 다 이바텔라 나세데네 다시 부모들라 빼트라시 타데 유스나 Ashitate is not tadi, Lusemni did in a could send a Yegorwa. The Nemat said, the Budinanet got the that Kasati race a chick one bar. Lord, the Chimbata Lakpata to a Kawakawa, while Sena, what a direse could dance Midwa. I asked, she don't tell Mazutera, Luda Semnimer, Semtine Marawa. Yet, Maria, that you know, today, Ranching to Bachus and attack with Tangorwa. They have been to us, and so that is, you know, they have been to one that day. Rashi, that they say, Ina, Pumbutilla Rashi, that is, you know, Kunin de Tuneta Rashi, Tatea Maresha, Sameta. There's a what that didn't last said, that in the Ranching to Bachulu, Tabasamamba, Ranching to Barango to Bach, Tanda, listen to the middle some say. Some mental somebody chune Ranching to Bachi, Mendu some. That take a lot. Such a number shacks.
Okay. So then, and so that we have that quote of Nagarjuna's root wisdom: if the self were other than aggregates, it would not have the characteristics of the aggregates. And so then the second fault, if that it is inherently different from other, then when one searches, there must be something that is demonstrable that one can find that is this inherent I. And if you search in the body through the parts of the body, the arms and so forth, there is nothing that can be demonstrated to be this inherent I. It's not found within the mind. And there is nothing that, putting those two aside, there is nothing to see that you can point to and say, this is the inherently existent I. And so therefore one concludes that there is no inherent I which is inherently different to the aggregates. And so coming to this conclusion, then you think, well, this I that seems to exist as not being merely labeled as existing from its own side as being inherently existent, there is no such thing that this is, there is no such thing, and you put your mind one-pointedly on the absence of that. Yes. Okay, and so again, we get the quote from Nagarjuna's root wisdom. If it is not correct for the self to be other than the appropriated aggregates, if it were other, it could be apprehended without the appropriated aggregates, yet it is not. So that one sees that it is not inherently other than the aggregates. And so therefore, from that beginning point where we have thought about this I that appears to us as if it exists from its own side, and that we have looked for it as being inherently one with the aggregates, and found the faults of the 6 faults associated with that, and we've looked at if it was inherently different and the faults that would arise if it was inherently different. And so then determining that such an I does not exist, and then one focuses one's attention on that absence of that I without distraction and laxity, and just holding that focus. And then this way we meditate on selflessness of person.
Yeah. So that is the complex explanation. It is the medicine of sleeping. You listen this teaching, you can get sleep. So that is the medicine of sleeping medicine. Sleep med. What is pill? Sleeping pill.
Called sleeping pill.
Is the I different from consciousness then? Because the previous teaching was that the consciousness was still there, the individual consciousness was still
That's
there.
a good point. Consciousness is there, but I is not consciousness.
Ah, exactly. Okay, that makes sense.
If I is consciousness, this consciousness is formless, yeah, formless. If you go out, you don't feel cold because formless. Consciousness is formless.
Okay.
You can't. People can't knife because of knife, because of bomb. People can't kill you because consciousness is formless, So that's why I is not conscious.
So I would be my identification to Carolyn. I'm a woman. I'm here in New Zealand. That would be the I.
Yeah.
Consciousness is outside of.
Yeah. So that. So that is the issue, Among the Buddhist philosophy school, such as Charama,
Great expositionist.
And also mind only school. They say that I is consciousness. They identify the person is consciousness. But this philosophy is what we call
Great expositionist and mind only school.
Person Kika Madhyamika school. That's the Sanskrit term. Person Kika Madhyamika school say I is not consciousness. There's no. Understand?
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing is that if I is consciousness, you go outside, you can't feel cold. Nobody can kill you, nobody can. This I is formless, yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay.
So that's why the I is not here inherently, just label.
Yeah.
But the appears I is just inherently here, and then kind of grasping it.
Grasp at it.
Grasp outside. And then same thing, if I see you guys, inherently Stephen is there, Henry is there, inherently there, then sometimes I get angry or, all these emotions are coming.
This is coming back to Tim's question in the morning. Are we finished? There's a question, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
do meditation first.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
That's a good question. I apologize.
Tim this morning said about consciousness, and he asked if it was, how it kind of was there all the way